First of all, Tanya, I just want to thank you for joining us. We have a number of folks on the call, and I did some workshops on microaggressions this last month, and a couple folk of color wrote me and said, okay, so these are pretty good skills, but as a person of color in a predominantly white organization, your strategies do not work. They weren't quite that, but that's the message I got. And I'm like, okay, so thank you for agreeing to say, so let me come in and share your perspective and all your experience in higher ed, particularly in consulting and senior diversity officer and coaching. And we had envisioned this as a conversation responding to folks' questions and chats, the chat room. So again, if you've joined us, yay. And please use the chat room and the Q&A to put in any questions you have. And we have some to start, and then we'll maybe flip over. And if you want to flip over, I think you can look at them too, right? You can see them?
I think so.
So follow wherever you want to go. I'm just so grateful for your wisdom and insights. And I wondered if it was useful to start telling people just a little bit about who you are and a little bit about your work in the world and maybe your journey as a woman of color to realize that all the strategies I use as a white woman to deal with microaggressions, probably not very career enhancing for folk of color, so.
Yeah, well, and I do want this to be a conversation because I think we conversate really well and keep it light and informative. And I want to hear more about the offerings that you've made, because what is true, I believe that some of the things that I'm offering might not be as effective for folks as well, because what I think, and this is from my own research around internalized subordination around race, sometimes in our different racial identity development, we're going to be able to show up in different ways in different places. And so I'll probably talk some about that. A little bit about my background and where I'm coming from and how I do my work in the world. Again, my name is Tanya Williams, and I am originally from Houston, Texas. I currently live in New York City and Oakland, California, but I always try to start with Texas because context matters. And my being raised in the South, the Southwest, and attending predominantly white schools, K through 12 in college with my master's degree and my doctoral work, it makes a difference. And I think that my coming to this work, coming to do social justice work, coming to really working in higher education and predominantly white institutions in higher education, does impact the way in which I have approached responding to microaggressions and how that all looked. I guess one of the things that I would say is that as I entered this work, or really entered work in higher education, my response to microaggressions used to be just a smile. That had so much to do with my own internalized subordination, the ways in which I understood systemic oppression. It was sort of like, kind of grin and bear it. That's, I think, what I was raised and taught to do, and really to put it in on myself. I tell the story all the time that I would be in meetings dealing with the microaggressions that would happen around me with all of my white colleagues, as I was often the only in the meeting, the only person of color, only Black person. And I would sit silently or, go back to my office and be angry, or go to the other one or two people of color on campus, one or two Black people on campus, and, debrief with them, but never would say anything to my white colleagues. And so it's been a process. When I was thinking about this work and was doing some reflection on so when did I start really responding in ways that I felt good and in line with my own values? it's only been about 10 years. In my late 30s, I'm 45 now, my late 30s, I think I started really getting clear that I had to maintain, and I understood my worth enough that it was important that I not respond with a smile anymore or silence, and it really is about staying in line with my values towards going after a world that is socially just, that works for everyone. So that's my opening statements.
Wow.
Of course, go on.
Well, I'm relating to being the white person that looks at people of color, see how I'm doing. And so if I do something and you smile, then I would interpret that probably even to this day as, okay, I'm doing okay. Maybe I did something. Oh no, Tanya's smiling, so I'm okay. And then I also know what we whites do, that when you do speak up, aren't smiling, how we punish, retaliate. What's wrong with you? You having a bad day?
Yep.
You have too much work going on? Do I need to take some stuff off your plate? Like, i.e., those special projects which will help you be seen and heard. Well, so I don't know if you have other experiences or of how we whites create the environment where it really is unsafe and even dangerous to speak truth to power and raise issues.
I just, as you were talking, Kathy, I had a flash of a supervisor in one of my first roles out of my master's degree. And this was a small private liberal arts college that really, there were 3 African-American folks on staff and faculty. And so there were 3 of us. And one of my colleagues, who was a really good friend of mine and still is a good friend of mine, we would have lunch every once in a while. And one of my supervisor, who was an older white man, would come up to us every time while we were sitting and having lunch and ask us what kind of trouble we were getting into. Every single time. It was sort of like, oh, here comes this person, and he's going to say the same exact things. Like, are y'all staying out of trouble? What kind of trouble y'all getting in? And it was that response, and where I was at the time, of, okay, I'm supposed to take this because this is my supervisor. And it feels completely unsafe to turn to him and say, I don't know if you understand this, but every time you insinuate that, you are playing on some really old stereotypes and some old, I know you're probably trying to connect with us. It is not connecting with us. And so it really, I think about all of the ways that I didn't feel safe to do it, because I was often, and this is what I see in so many nonprofits and corporations that I work with, that there is no one that has significant positional power. And I most definitely didn't have positional power it's not even a challenge. And I hate that people have it written, that some white people have it written as, oh, you're challenging me. It really was when I interrupt microaggressions, I see it as I'm actually giving a gift because I'm not allowing you to continue in your ignorance. That is not how it's often heard.
Really?
But it really, because the story, I think about that same interaction, it's like, I didn't want to be around my supervisor because he didn't know what else. He didn't have a way to interact with us that was authentic. And so it's a gift when someone stops and says that what you're doing right now is not actually working, or it is being experienced in this way. I wish people would see it as a gift, and we're not there yet.
I know I'm not, and we worked together a number of times, and I would hope I would continue to hear your feedback as a gift. And I think I'm a lot of whites, like a lot of whites who are like, I'm trying not to be seen as racist. I'm trying not to do something racist, truly value the relationship with folks of color, and so I'm afraid to say something. So I relate to that supervisor because I think I've made that racist joke before of, I mean, what you described, I have memories. I just can't bring it up. And you nailed it. My intent was to connect, but I didn't know how to connect because I hadn't done any relationship building. And so I use this moment to like, hey, and why would, yeah. And what's the cost if you were to say something, even with the style you just role played? What do we white people do when folks of color in our minds dare to give us feedback and critique us? And what are you doing? Challenging us, attacking us? I mean, that's how we frame it. Nowhere close to gift. It's like, you just attacked me. So what's the cost?
The cost is just what you were saying earlier. It's like, so what's wrong with you, Tanya? Can't you take a joke? Aren't you, can't you see that I'm trying to connect, or I was just being lighthearted. The cost is, I experience it as a cost to an authentic relationship, and a cost to having my voice be present, because I will say it, I'm relatively wise, and so you want my voice present. But if you shut me down constantly or have me feel like what I just experienced was not based in any type of racial inequities and a system of race, it's shortchanging the authentic connection and dialogue that we can have. And I think the thing that frustrates me a lot when I work with folks at nonprofits is that it is a spoken, I guess, an expression of a nonprofit workplace that they want to have a racially just or anti-racist space, but won't be able to, but aren't able to really have authentic conversations. And so it troubles me when folks say that, particularly white people say that they want an anti-racist space, but cannot hear feedback about microaggressions. We will never, ever, ever get to that anti-racist space or racially just space if we can't even get into the little bit of microaggressions. We're in trouble. And I think about the cost to white people, because I think we often miss the conversation that white people are harmed in this work and dehumanized at the same time. It hurts me that a lot of white people think that they have really close relationships with people of color, and that's actually it's not happening, because if people of color cannot speak the microaggressions that are happening most of the time unintentionally, but they can't say it and speak it and have it in the air, that relationship is not as authentic as we think it is.
Someone wrote in wondering about, could we talk, probably you, talk more about what could you say to white folk in those moments? So I want to ask the folks that are listening, that are on video, could you type in, a sentence or two of the type of microaggression you'd like Tanya and maybe me to reflect on? And as you were talking and that question came in, what do you think of this idea? I was wondering if relationships, so white, you set it up as white supervising person of color, mm-hmm. or a team of folk where you're the only person of color or one of a few. What do you think of the idea of negotiating ahead of time how we're going to engage each other? And it's all of our responsibilities to notice microaggressions. And when a person of color does take the risk to raise mm-hmm. issues, how could and should whites engage? And so you're negotiating that. Is that kind of, we whites like to negotiate these things. So I want to make sure I'm not being too white culture here, but I wonder if it could be useful.
What's true is folks of color have learned to be in organizations and have learned how to negotiate too. And so that is not foreign to me. I think it only makes sense to me, and we talk about it all the time when working with organizations. We talk about having them set some guidelines and some ground rules and ways of engaging with each other to help them have these conversations and have these moments. And so that creates that practice creates a safer space, both for the person of color to speak the microaggression or the microaggressions into the room, but also I believe a safe space for the white people to, because I think what is often happening when we talk about microaggressions is that white people are responding from a place of shame. And that shame short circuits any kind of effective response that allows for white people to hear it. And so I think creating those guidelines or creating that, I hate to say it's protocol because that is totally white culture. It creates a way for people to enter into these potentially tense moments where all parties can be heard. And that it's like, having that laid out, I think about with that supervisor, and I could talk about a number of other microaggressions that I've either heard from folks that I've gotten to work with or that I've experienced myself. When setting up that kind of those guidelines, that kind of protocol, it slows the moment down. And I think about, doing workshops and facilitations, we always talk about slowing the moment down so that we can dissect it and kind of see what's happening, but also kind of stay present to it. We can kind of feel our feelings, notice the shame that comes up, notice the fear that comes up, the risk, all of that. But if it's in a group, in a workspace, I think that that's almost the only way that we can do it.
I love that you brought in shame and guilt, because when I work with whites, I hear them say it all the time. And then we go into fight, flight, freeze, flounder. And I think a part of it, but tell me what you think, is also the racist beliefs we still hold. And I still think part of it is, how dare you confront me, especially in public? Whereas if you're a white person, there still might be the irritation, but it just seems enhanced. I don't know if you've ever experienced, and then we do have a specific microaggression. Mm-hmm. But do you feel like there's this arrogance, entitlement, how dare you? You're not in your place when you give me feedback? Because I think that's what we do as whites in our privileged identity.
I totally, yes, most definitely. And I think that is where my work around my own internalized racial subordination, like my place is actually to tell the truth and to tell the truth as I see it. And I often say this to friends, that sometimes white people forget that they don't run everything. And I'm here to say, you don't run everything. And I want us all to live in the truth of the world, in the reality, rather than the story that we've been given by a system of racism. And so I can appreciate that there may be some frustration and hesitation and playing out of internalized dominance of you're not in your place. And for me, it's do you want this system or do you not? Do you want a world that we so are talking about? It's like, we want a socially just world. It's like, do you want that or do you not? It feels that cut and dry for me.
And if we tie that back to what you were saying about have a conversation beforehand, or what are our norms, or I haven't heard you that clear in that kind of a setting to be able to say, we say this is what we're about, do we want it? If so, what does this mean for us as whites when we show up in microaggressions, or we see another white do a microaggression? What does that mean for us? How do we need to show up? Not, oh, I didn't mean it. It wasn't, come on, it wasn't my intent. and just really exploring the impact and apologizing. But we whites are white. So can I offer you what somebody asked about a specific situation?
Sure.
They said, in a meeting in your functional area of expertise, yet you're treated as if you're not present by the whites in the room.
Yeah. And so it's harder in, I think, group settings. I often think about having relational experiences with people, and so I can go right to them and say, so what you just did, that thing doesn't work for me. In a group setting, I think, and this this is one of those moments that, you know, again, my stories around internalized racial subordination comes up because the story I think that people of color have been given is that if we show up really in our power in that setting, something will happen to us. It's not safe. We will be othered. All of those, and it's not just story. It's actually also been like found truth. And so we're living with the racism and what our minds have done with the racism, even though it may not have happened to us, it's happened to somebody else. And so I don't want it to happen to us, to me. It feels important though, in those moments to also say, you know, to interject your voice, because the response to the microaggression is, we don't see you, or we don't see your expertise in this. The interruption is to actually, like, literally put yourself in that room in a way, and it's I don't believe it has to be like, okay, I'm going to give you all of the information that I know about this topic, but I am going to let you know that I'm here.
And what could that, I'm sorry.
Well, and just what you're asking, it can look like getting, and it's hard, you know, in some ways I would love to have a video of microaggressions happening, put a pause on it. This is what we can do to interrupt. What I am picturing is that people are just talking over me and not acknowledging or noticing or saying, Tanya, I know you know something about this. Do you have something to contribute? It really might have to be, excuse me, I've done some work in this. This is what my thoughts are. And it really, it is sometimes a point of, I'm about to say screaming, I'm here, but it's obviously not screaming, but it's a, see me. I'm not going to let you not see me.
I love that.
Yeah.
Sometimes I talk about a continuum. I don't know if it's a continuum, but you can do an indirect intervention, a redirect, or a direct. Mm-hmm. What I'm wondering is if you have, or you suggest that people might start least confrontive to see if that's enough, or you're like, you're going to see me, you know, and enter more in a direct way.
I think in that situation, I think I went straight to direct, mm-hmm. because it doesn't sound like, I think about indirect, moderate, and direct. It doesn't, my indirect might be getting the eye of one of my white colleagues to say, you know, you see me, get me into this conversation. You know, that situation, I'm totally picturing like voices flying and, you know, and just people not acknowledging and not, I don't think white people experience or see how much people of color don't ever get seen. I've walked through the streets. Just the other day, I was getting off a train on the Amtrak, and someone basically pulled their suitcase down on my head. And it's a function of not being seen. And so I think sometimes in those situations, it has to be a direct, like, see me, because it's an overlooking that is just so, I think that is a function of internalized dominance.
Yeah. I matter. You don't. I don't even see you.
Yep.
And even if you're there, you're in my way.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's having me wonder about, again, if we're proactive, either those one or two whites you trust or the whole group, to look at the common dynamics that happen in meetings,
Mm-hmm.
how they impact anybody, but then particularly how they impact from white to people of color. That may get a few more whites aware and intervening, so folks of color aren't carrying all of the weight and burden and emotional tax of having to take the huge risk. We have a second one. Do you want me to read it, or do you want to read it?
Why don't you read it so people can hear and I can read along?
How can I navigate not being heard at meetings? I find when I bring up questions and suggestions, I'm told to clarify, or they don't understand what I'm saying. I love it. I'm told to clarify, not asked a question. Just priceless. I then wonder if there's something I'm doing wrong. I've asked for feedback and I'm told that I'm fine, but it keeps happening. It's quite frustrating. What can I do? Wow.
The first thing that I immediately think, and I think that this is key for folks of color, is that know that you're not doing anything wrong. This is a function and a dynamic of oppression. Yeah. It really, I can completely understand that it is frustrating, because it's that experience of, I know that because what is probably true is you've thought of how are you going to say something before you say it, because oppression teaches us that we have to do that. And so you know that you're clear. And I, again, think that it is a function, it is a way to deal with this, is to use some time, perhaps in that meeting or another meeting, to say, I want to share with you a dynamic that I keep seeing. And I hate that, what comes to my mind is preface it with, we don't need to get into a deep conversation about what it means, but this is a pattern that I keep seeing. And I've asked for feedback. I've heard that I'm fine, but it is a constant pattern. And so I need for us as a team to talk about how we can stop this pattern. And because what I think sometimes happens is that microaggressions then become the problem of the folks of color.
Yeah.
It actually needs to be everybody's problem. That this is a team dynamic, and so the team can figure out together, what do we need to do to not have this happen again? Because my experience of it is going to have me not contributing anymore. And again, you want my information, you want my knowledge. So I would really bring it back to the whole team to say, this is a dynamic that I'm noticing regularly, and what can we do about it?
I love that strategy. And I can also imagine you say, has anybody else noticed that dynamic?
Yeah.
So that you're not the only one, and see what other whites might have courage to come in and test.
I love it.
Please.
Can I make a point there? What I heard in the connection of our two responses is the joint working that has to happen. That it can't fall on any, I talk about it as any one side. I think of oppression being the spot that meets up between dominant and subordinate identities, that piece right here. And what has happened, I don't know if this is going to make sense, that it's become mostly the responsibility of, if these are folks of color, mostly the responsibility of people of color to carry that weight. We actually have got to both do our work from our locations to make any difference.
Totally. Can I test an idea out of you? Because this is where, as a white person, I would say this. Mm-hmm. So if as a white woman, white lesbian, I'm not being heard, I experience it out of my marginalized identity, but I have all this other privilege, doctor, right? But in that moment that someone suggests I'm not being heard, I know I've said, could somebody else share what they heard me say? So,
Yep.
but I got all this privilege. I just want to test that out. If someone has multiple marginalized identities, there's a higher risk, but I don't know what you might think of that, because I'm like done with not being heard. And I don't want to repeat myself. It's like, oh no, you don't deserve me to use my energy with you anymore. What does somebody else think?
Yeah, I appreciate that you said, can someone else say what they heard me say? Because I also have heard that said as, can someone say it better? And that's not what we want happening. Because exactly the way that you said it makes sense and is okay. Someone else may have heard it in a different way and could say it, but I actually think that's a great response. I think sometimes, unfortunately, from folks of color, it still can be experienced as being uppity.
Yeah.
And you gotta almost know your crowd, like who in the room, and this is why I know that organizations need the wisdom and insight of people of color, because they have learned how to read and navigate systems like nobody else. And so that there's a level of wisdom there that organizations need, but are missing out on because of microaggressions.
Yeah. Hey, we got another one.
Okay.
You want me to read it again, or you want to?
I could take it.
Okay.
Any suggestions for calling out folks who come to me, the manager of diversity services, to help them find diversity for their area, board, committee, etc.? I work in the student services area of the college, but they are not asking me about including students. I take it as, you must know some folks of color. You can give me some names of people I can ask. I find it so annoying, but struggle with maintaining the professional relationship, and it's different individuals each time. I also don't want to out my small network of other professionals of color. We get tapped for too much representation as it is. Yes. So there's, if we were to do like themes of microaggressions, this falls under the theme of, and I heard this just the other day with a nonprofit I was working with, that there aren't enough people of color. We hired someone that was white for this role. We just couldn't find any folks of color.
Qualified is the unspoken racist.
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly. It's like, yeah. So again, well, the first thing I think of, I appreciate that you are protecting your small network of other professionals of color, because I think that's one of the things that I think it's important to help people understand, that other folks of color are not the well that you can go and draw other people of color from, that it's not a never-ending well. And in the meantime, when we offer relationships or networks that we have the potential of damaging those networks by sending people into spaces that are not anti-racist or attempting to be socially just. So that said, I go to a place of, this is often my fallback of when people come in those ways, like, who else did you ask? And potentially, and you do work in diversity services, but what does your network look like? Have you attempted to build networks with people of color that you can call on yourself, as opposed to going to diversity services and saying, you must have a whole bunch of folks of color, in the back room that you can just call on? Really engaging someone about, how do you create those networks yourself? And not just come to the person of color that you know to provide use of names. That is an interruption. It also, you could also take the time to go on and to say, when you ask folks of color this, have you asked other white people? Are you only asking people of color about? So really engage in a conversation of, so what is the assumption there that only people of color have networks of color? And have you done the work to really start to develop your own network?
Love that, because it puts it back, the responsibility, where it should have been in the first place.
Yep.
And I was imagining being on the other end of that conversation with you, and I could hear whites saying, what's the big deal? I just came by once to ask. You're just so touchy and sensitive and angry all the time. Because I don't think whites get cumulative impact.
Mm-hmm.
And so our commoner behavior feels like an isolated incident when
it's not. There's a great video that I often use when I talk about microaggressions. If you look up mosquitoes and microaggressions on YouTube, fantastic video. And it gives a very simple kind of, it actually doesn't even name cumulative impact, but it talks about essentially, if microaggressions were mosquitoes, people who get bit all the time have a very different experience of it when there are folks who don't get it bit as often. And they have this great image, and it's a cute little cartoon video, but this great image of this Black woman who's just getting all of these mosquito bites that represent microaggressions. And she kind of lets loose with a flamethrower on the mosquitoes. And, off to the side, there are two white men saying, oh, she's just another angry Black woman. And that it's such a good way to talk about cumulative impact, because usually folks don't see the 100 days in a row that someone has asked me about my hair or tried to touch it or had some smart comment about how my hair is different than it was a week ago. Or you don't see that 100 days leading up to the moment where I just kind of throw my hands up and ask you to leave my office. It really, we have to understand the ways in which the dynamics of oppression work, not only for groups that have a dominant position in systems of racism and oppression, but also how the dynamics of oppression impact marginalized groups as well.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm thinking whites, particularly like me, have multiple privileged identities, are like, something happens, I just respond to it if it's coming at me, right? And I wonder, are there some extra dynamics, burdens, issues that folks of color are juggling and having to weigh? Mm-hmm. Do I say something now? Do I say it later? What's the cost to me if I don't speak up? Would you mind sharing a bit about what some of that inner dialogue might be? Because that may get some whites to understand, oh, there's more to it than just I'm at the individual level with all my privilege and I can do it. Why can't you speak up?
Yeah, I'll start with everything for me goes back to the ways that we've internalized our subordination. And so I'll start with the ways that I was told as a Black child growing up that I had to navigate all of these things to survive. And so, when my very basic survival is built into this, that is part of the moment that a microaggression happens. That either my survival in the workplace, the survival of this relationship, I'm having to navigate, what is the risk that I'm going to take? Am I going to be, outcasted and shoved aside and this has happened before, have important meetings happen without me? when I have been in them the week before, but because I spoke up and noticed and noted a microaggression, I have been left out of the meeting the next week. And so all of those things, plus, there's always the risk of, am I going to have a job? If this is connected to my job, am I going to be able to, is someone going to find something? Is someone, and it's really even going to interpret something that I've done later to be a reason to not have me in this space anymore. And so it might be, someone says something and I'm going down all of these lists and making all of these decisions about how I handle this at any given time. And I was thinking about this beforehand, and it's like, the exhaustion of oppression and of racism, just having to, show up every day in a system that is actually not built for you, and you are not sure that it actually wants you to survive in it. All of that is going on in these moments of trying to negotiate and navigate. Like, what do I do right here, right now? Because oppression is tricky. Oppression will move on you in a second. And so you're constantly trying to think of, like, so what is this dynamic that's showing up right now, and how can I best navigate it so that I can survive whole on the other side of it?
God, the exhaustion I'm hearing. And I remember we were just doing a workshop together on navigating triggers in difficult situations. And I was talking about, you can be a zero, have no emotion. It's like you're sitting on the beach in the sun. And you said something like, I realize that every time I leave my house,
yeah.
I just leave at a mild trigger, if not medium, just because of the cumulative impact and what I anticipate is going to happen. And that was just a few weeks ago. It's a great insight for me.
Well, and it's a great insight, and it was a hard one for me in that moment, because I don't want to be at a low level trigger all the time. If I wake up in a triggered state, or knowing that I have to leave my house in a triggered state, I think about like Stephen Covey's emotional bank account. If we were to do a bank account of triggers, if white people get to start at 0 every day, and I'm, as a Black woman, starting at a 4 or a 5 or a 3, yeah, and then the world is going to give me more, and so it's going to build up faster, and then it's going to look like I am, the angry Black woman. And most of the time, I think when people talk about angry Black women, it's actually just the directness of Black women. Folks trying to maintain their core self and speaking what is true for them. It just comes off it's being read as angry when it actually is just clear and clarity. Yeah.
Behaviors that I can do as a white person and not get read as angry.
Yep.
I'm really feeling, literally my body my stomach hurts, because I'm imagining all the energy it takes and all the thought work to get to the place where you choose how you want to respond in those moments. Mm-hmm. Where I'm sitting in the meeting as a white person, not doing any of that inner work because I don't have to. I'm just, the toll it takes is just sitting with me.
And that is why, if white people are naming themselves as allies, activists, accomplices, trying to work towards social justice, when a person of color is able to and is ready to interrupt a microaggression, it has to be received as a gift.
Yeah.
It has to be. Because one, that person of color is willing to take enough of a risk with you to speak that truth, knowing that any number of things could happen. Two, they actually are willing to trust you in your statement of, I want to be an ally to you. And so I don't see how it can be taken as anything but a gift. And I will say, for me, it helps when I am able to share things that I experience as microaggressions with white people and have them be received in ways, there might be shame present, there may be feelings that come with it, all of those things. White people who can stay with me and work the problem, which is oppression, neither one of us are the problem. White person is the problem, person of color is not the problem. Oppression is actually the problem. But when they can stay with me and be in that conversation as we work the problem, that's when I can count somebody as an ally.
Yeah, I think the white people fear is like, ooh, let me get out of this as fast as I can so I don't say anything else. And tell me I'm wrong, you're saying, stay in it with me. Let's talk about racism from our different positions. What's your part in this? What do you need to do differently? But stay in it with me.
Yep.
Even when it gets hard.
Because white folks have run so much, run from staying in the struggle of racism. Because white folks have been able to, because of power. Social power allows for white folks to leave the conversation. And I'm grounded and committed to, it's like I struggle with people saying that they want these things, but then not being willing to actually stick around to do something different. And that's when I just start, calling your bluff. Like, you said you want to be an ally. Let's do it.
Oh, whites will be very scared when you say that. Many. I love it. But yeah.
And I want whites to hear that I didn't say, I'm going to call your bluff. Let's do it. You handle it by yourself. I am right here with you because I know that our humanity is actually linked. And if either one of us from our different positionality decides like it's all your work, well, it's not going to move. It's never going to move. So I'm to the point now. I'm ready to call people's bluff.
Love it. I'm still back with your hand gesture a bit ago, because I think it's related to what you were just saying. Because you see me all the time doing privileged, marginalized. You had it. You still said privileged, marginalized, but you had two people showing up as equal. And I had this new thought. I want to test. Your whites think we're here. People of color less than effective. When you call me on something, I go one down, like now you're going to have the power and punish me and I'm bad. And you're asking for, no, show up and partner.
Yes.
I don't know if whites know how to partner as a group. I know I'm still learning. How do I show up, not better than, worse than, ashamed, guilt, but partnering with you, with your wisdom, partnering.
Yeah, I love that. And I do have it as equal because that's what it is. That's the truth that I know. And then I know that oppression has us working from these marginalized and dominant places. I think you're right that there's this, it turns into this. And I go to, white culture has taught us that community and collaboration and connection actually is not important. So it feels like white people may not know how to partner. And that's all the more reason that, it's like, this is a place where you can say, I'm not sure how to do this, but I want to be in with you. That's about community. That's about collaboration. I think I've been doing some work around Dr. Barbara Love's liberatory consciousness, and really like, how do we practice a liberatory consciousness? And part of liberatory consciousness is to be in accountability to others. And that white people have only had to be accountable like to nobody, because that's what social power allows. This is the point in which, if we're really going to do this work and partner in the way that we can, it is about white people being accountable to people of color. And I think that that's when white people stay in conversations and like are able to hear microaggressions. That's about partnering. That's about actually saying, whoa, I didn't know. And like, help me understand how that landed on you. Not necessarily, you know, crying about it and having it, you know, the energy and the focus turned back to you, but it's like, I need to understand this better, and I want to amend and make some amends with our relationship. Because if I really want to have a relationship and move towards a world that is equitable, that's what we have to do.
We had one more question come in, and it may not have been related to what you're saying, but I wonder if some folk, white and of color, can hear what you're saying about the issue is oppression, right? That, you know, coddling whites. So someone asked, what are some good ways that you found for being compassionate to white folks as fellow human beings without getting the position of caretaking or draining yourself? And when they're doing that, I'm going to put in Dr. Barbara Love's information that somebody asked for.
Okay. So I love that question, because for me, that is where a lot of I feel like as folks of color, we sometimes have learned as part of our internalized racial subordination. The only thing that we know how to do is coddle and to caretake. And when I have, and as I do, and let's be clear, I don't think I'm ever going to be done doing my work around racial, internalized racial subordination. But as I do that work, I can separate my role of being a caretaker, which is learned and generationally learned. It's a generational memory of Black people caring for white people, particularly coming out of the South. I would say across the nation with domestics, and I see it around New York City even now with people caring for children. When I step out of my role of being caretaker and step into my humanity and see this person as another human who I just want to connect to, that's when I move into a place of compassion. That it really is not about me needing to, and it's not what I remember when I started working with, like, so how do I not, you know, move in and say we're in a workshop, how do I not, you know, run to the white person, give them tissue, start patting them and making sure they're okay. I was afraid that that I would need to harden my heart to kind of stay, you know, static and not see this human being over here crying. It's like, that actually is not what is true at all. It's like, I actually am able to open my heart more because it's coming from a more connected human place. That the compassion, it really is, I have compassion for the pain or the shame or the whatever you're going through right now. But I, as a person of color, don't need to step into a role of caretaking. That it really can be, are you okay? Because I see you as a human being, and I'm going to trust that you, as an adult, can actually care for yourself. And that, for me, that comes out of a lot of work around my own internalized racial subordination, but also work around my own, you know, fear of, you know, not being liked and all of that stuff.
So relate.
Yeah.
We could keep going. And I know we're close to time. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind talking a bit about some of the ways that you support folk of color to do the internalized healing work. Because I realize that it could be, I don't know, but I see so many books that are focused on whites. I know a lot of my work is focused on developing whites, and healing internalized dominance. And I'm like, is it just the publishing industry isn't publishing more, or we're not? So I just don't see as much energy in organizations. It's like, y'all lucky to be here. Now let me help the white people work with you, as opposed to let's heal oppression all around us. So if you wouldn't mind, and I put your information back up in case people want to connect with you.
Sure. One of the things that when I was working on my doctorate, one of the things I recognized was that so much of the work that we do around racism and oppression is to get white people up to speed. And I can think about my own trainings early in my career. Much of my work was, I see you people of color, join me as we help these white people get up to speed. And somewhere in my doctoral work, I got that. I'm like, oh no, we all actually have been hurt by this. And yes, there is work that white folks need to do from their position of power. There's a lot of work and healing that needs to be done for folks of color who have historically and are currently dealing with systems of racism. And so the work that I do with folks comes by way of coaching. Sometimes I've been brought into organizations to do affinity group work, to have people really do some reflection on how have we internalized these systems of racism, and what is the work that we can do individually and with each other in community to heal from, the disease of racism. The disease of racism shows up differently in white people than it does in people of color. And so there's different work that needs to be done. And that's mostly what my work is.
I could imagine some white people will hear that and say, from the deficit model, oh, people of color are broken or they're damaged. And that's not what you're saying.
Nope, not at all. Not at all. Everybody, the clearest way I can say is that everybody, if oppression is we all start out like perfectly fine. If oppression is a vial of poison, we all have drank it. And white people have taken in internalized dominance, and people of color have taken in internalized subordination around race. And so we're all whole human beings that we're not broken at all. We just have been acting out of our learned positions in the system of racism. And just as white people, there is lots of healing, and I leave it up to you, lots of healing for white people to do around internalized dominance. There is just as much healing, and healing, the healing that I'm talking about is the emotional, clearing out some of the system from our brain. In the same way that white people have to clear out some of the system from their brain. And everybody has to take risk in different ways, but everyone has to take risks to move into this world that we want, that is socially just and equitable. And I just choose to do a lot. I do work with groups and nonprofits and organizations and corporations, but I choose to do work primarily sometimes with people of color around internalized racial subordination.
So maybe, as we have to probably go to closure because we're over, I always do this, but I just had a new idea. I'm trying to imagine what would be different in an organization if folks really invested in the healing space for folks of color. And so folks of color aren't thinking I'm the only one or there's something wrong with me, but to truly bring folks of color together to do some of this empowerment work. Healing may not be the word that folks will hear, but empowerment work. What have you experienced or know would be different in an organization, a cross-race organization, predominantly white, when you invest in the folks of color in this way?
Oh my goodness. Wow. I just kind of felt like my brain opened up of just the wealth of insight and knowledge. I read an article or maybe I saw it on Facebook. Someone posted something that We should be going after queer women of color and having them be our leaders, because they actually have so much more knowledge than they see the world, and I am one of them. We see the world vastly different because we've had to navigate and negotiate in so many ways. And so if an organization actually created spaces for people to do that empowerment work, if empowerment is something that people can hear, voices and insights, and, you know, I think about opportunities for people to contribute their whole selves to their workplace. Organizations have no idea how much they are losing out on when they truly do not create spaces that are equitable and inclusive. And they think they are because they've gotten a few more people of color to be present in the organization and be seen. Like you have a little bit more diversity, and you're thinking that you've done it well. An inclusive and equitable space allows for everyone to bring their whole selves, which means bring their whole knowledge base and wisdom and insights and ways of seeing the world. And that is going to lift your company, you know, beyond what you can even imagine, I believe.
Thank you so much for
It's my pleasure.
sharing your wisdom, your time, and any final reflections or thoughts to have more of the last word? Or
I think the only thing that I would say, what I often hear organizations do, a couple that I've worked with, that I've done affinity work with, they'll say, well, we want to do this work with the folks of color. We now know that we need to do some empowerment work with people of color. I will ask them, it's like, so what are you doing with the white folks? Because the internalized piece to me it's double-sided, and it's going to be uneven unless we both do the work. So think of it as there is general understanding of social justice and the ways in which our oppression and the ways in which these systems act themselves out. And then there's the ways in which each position of power internalizes those. And so that is a comprehensive education on challenging oppression or creating an inclusive and an equitable organization. Doing it one side without the other, or just doing this, it's not enough. And then you move to policies and practices and all of these things. So this has been a blast. Thank you, Kathy. I could clearly keep talking.
Well, I don't know if you'd be willing to do this some more. If you are, I was going to invite folk as we're closing out, if you want to use the chat room or email me, what other topics would you like this? Because I'm doing other kinds of webinars and Q&As, but I'm like, this was so much fun and really appreciate and value you. And so, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, my friend. And all those that are listening now or in recording, hope this was useful, and all the best to you.